New places, new perspectives, same questions, better answers. I'm Rowan Vale, and this is where learning becomes identity. Let's kick off today with the idea that the barrier isn't always the student. College campuses are often described as places of opportunity, places where everyone has the chance to learn, to grow, to discover who they are. But today, I want to ask a different question. Opportunity for whom? Imagine arriving for your first day of class. You can't find the accessible entrance. The lecture moves faster than your brain can process. The professor assumes accommodations are an inconvenience. Or maybe, everything looks perfectly fine from the outside, while inside you're managing anxiety, chronic illness, ADHD, autism, depression, or another disability that no one else can see. What would anyone know? Would anyone ask? Or would everyone simply assume that you're just another student? So for many students with disabilities, college isn't only about earning a degree. It's also about deciding when to ask for help and when to explain yourself, and whether the environment around you was ever even designed with you in mind. So today, we're exploring disability identity, not simply as a diagnosis and not simply as a legal category, but as an important part of how students understand themselves and how colleges either create opportunities or unintentionally create barriers. Let's explore. I think it's important to start with the idea that disabilities are more than a diagnosis. When many people hear the word disability, they immediately picture something visible: a wheelchair, a white cane, a hearing aid, and those disabilities can certainly exist. But disability is far broader than what we immediately notice. Students may live with dyslexia, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, depression, anxiety, chronic illness, traumatic brain injuries, learning disabilities, autoimmune disorders, or temporary injuries that suddenly change how they navigate campus. Some students have spent years advocating for themselves before arriving at college. Others receive a diagnosis only after beginning college, finally understanding why learning has always felt different. Still, others develop disabilities during their college years entirely unexpectedly. The Americans with Disabilities Act, commonly known as the ADA, requires colleges and universities to provide reasonable accommodations so that qualified students have the equitable access to education. But having legal rights does not automatically make asking for support easy. In fact, one of the most surprising findings from this module's readings is that many students who qualify for accommodations never disclose their disabilities. Not because they don't need support, but because they're afraid. Afraid of being judged, afraid professors won't believe them, afraid classmates will see them differently, or perhaps afraid that acknowledging their disability somehow changes who they are. As I thought about this, I realized something. Identity is rarely just about what we experience. It's also about what we believe other people will think when they learn our story. But what about when the environment becomes the barrier? For generations, disability was viewed as almost entirely through what scholars called the medical model. The assumption was simple: if someone struggled, the problem existed inside that person. Their body needed fixing, their mind needed correcting, and the condition needed treatment. And while medicine certainly plays an important role, student development scholars have increasingly challenged this way of thinking. Instead, they ask a different question. What if disability isn't only about the individual? What if many barriers actually come from society? This is known as the social model of disability. Rather than asking what's wrong with the student, the social model asks, what obstacles have we created? Maybe the classroom isn't physically accessible. Maybe online course materials can't be used with screen readers. Maybe attendance policies leave no flexibility for chronic illness. Maybe faculty misunderstand accommodations, and maybe classmates assume disability means inability. In other words, sometimes the greatest challenge isn't the disability itself, it's the environment surrounding it. This idea reminded me of something we've discussed throughout this podcast. Whether we're talking about race, sexuality, gender, or disability, student development has never happened in isolation. Students don't simply adapt to environments. Environments shape students too. Every culture, every institution, every language communicates assumptions about intelligence, independence, productivity, and belonging. Learning another language often reveals that those assumptions are not universal. And perhaps one of the greatest responsibilities of higher education is asking whether our campuses truly reflect the diversity of the students we invite to attend. One of the most important aspects of student development theory is learning to see yourself. If disability is shaped partly by environment, then disability identity becomes much more than diagnosis. It becomes a journey. Researchers have proposed several ways to understand this journey. One of my favorites comes from Johnstone, who argued that disability identity isn't a straight line. Some identities are imposed by other people. Some students overcompensate, constantly trying to prove that they belong. Others embrace disability as a source of pride. Some find community. Others integrate disability alongside race, gender, sexuality, religion, and every other part of who they are. Another model, developed by Gibson, describes three broad stages. First comes passive awareness. Students may acknowledge medical needs but avoid identifying with disability. Next comes realization. Students begin asking difficult questions. Why me? How will people see me? Will this define me? And finally comes acceptance. Disability becomes one meaningful part of a larger identity rather than something to hide. Importantly, these stages aren't permanent. Students move back and forth. Maybe a difficult semester, an inaccessible classroom, a frustrating interaction. Many of these might change how they feel about it. And all these experiences can make someone revisit earlier stages before moving forward again. College doesn't simply teach students chemistry or literature or even Japanese. For many students, college is where they first learn how to advocate for themselves. One of my favorite moments from Dr. Bray's lecture notes wasn't a statistic, it was a student's words. I feel sometimes like I'm on a boat in the dark. I know other people are on the boat, but I can't see them. And I haven't stopped thinking about that sentence. Because belonging isn't simply about having accommodations, belonging is knowing you aren't navigating alone. Research consistently shows that students who feel that they belong on campus are more likely to advocate for themselves, perceive the campus climate more positively, and experience greater satisfaction with college. That belonging often grows through surprisingly ordinary things: meeting another student with similar experiences, finding an encouraging faculty member, joining a peer mentoring program, seeing someone who looks like you, or thinks like you, or experiences the world like you succeed. Sometimes it's simply hearing someone say, "My brain just works differently." What changed wasn't the student's brain. What changed was finding people who understood. Sometimes the most important accommodation isn't a piece of technology, it's another human being saying, "You aren't alone." I'd like to think that the conversation about disability can move beyond access. I'd like to think that one of the reoccurring motifs of this podcast series has been that there's a difference between access and engagement. Access asks, can students get into the room? Engagement asks, can students fully participate once they're there? Those are not the same question. A campus can comply with federal law and still leave students feeling isolated. A university can approve accommodations and still fail to cultivate belonging. True inclusion requires something more. It requires educators willing to see students through multiple lenses: developmental, educational, civil rights, social justice, vocational, administrative, and intersectional. Every student carries multiple identities into college, and every student deserves an environment where those identities can flourish. Disability inclusion isn't simply about removing barriers. It's about creating communities where students no longer spend all of their energy overcoming obstacles, and instead spend that energy learning, connecting, leading, and ultimately becoming who they're meant to be. Okay, and that's a wrap. Thank you, dear listener. This marks our final content episode of Global Selves. Across 10 conversations, we've explored how language learning intersects with race, culture, gender, sexuality, faith, personality, social class, cognitive development, and now disability. Every episode has pointed towards the same truth. Language learning doesn't simply teach us new words. It teaches us new ways of seeing, new ways of listening, new ways of questioning the assumptions that we've inherited. And perhaps that's what disability identity ultimately teaches us as well. Every campus speaks a language, sometimes through policies, sometimes through buildings, sometimes through attitudes. The most welcoming campuses speak a language that says, you don't have to become someone else to belong here. We'll build a community where you can become more fully yourself. Because accessibility isn't simply about opening doors. It's about making sure that everyone has the opportunity to walk through them in their own way. I'm Rowan Vale. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Global Selves. And until we meet again, dear listener, stay curious, keep learning, and never stop becoming.